talk to us about what's going on with our good friends at Goldman.
Well, a couple of weeks back, you already saw press reports that Goldman Sachs was going to go deeper than any of its mainstream banking peers with a pullback that could be up to 4,000 jobs getting cut, or about 8% of their workforce. Of course, until yesterday, Goldman itself hadn't confirmed any of that. But in his traditional year-end message, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon really didn't come in with that typical holiday cheer. He spent almost...
Is it usually full of holiday cheer in amongst the DJing?
Even if it's not a lot of the holiday cheer, it is a lot of the rallying the troops and encouraging them for the year ahead, congratulating on the year that just went by. But this one, about 2/3 of the message was dedicated to talking about the headcount reduction. And perhaps he's right in doing that. You might as well give them the harsh medicine up front, because he gave us a little bit of news yesterday when he said that the job cuts will be coming as soon as the first half of January. So that's just a matter of weeks. And if they do go ahead with job cuts that amount to what, 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 jobs, you might as well want people on guard, even if it's the last week of December. And that's when the CEO went out and said it's a very uncertain 2023 that we're entering. There are a lot of pressures on the business. He's already talked about it in the past, including with Bloomberg Television, about the pressures that they have been facing on their own expense line. Yeah. And with that increased investor focus on costs, Goldman Sachs wants to get out ahead of the narrative. It already knows it's unlikely to meet its return on equity targets, and it needs to show investors, it needs to show its shareholders that it recognizes that, and it's taking measures and steps to address that.
That it cares about margin. But also, is it because we, through COVID, got rather used to a lack of culling, a lack of this getting rid of the bottom rung that we'd all anticipated usually year in, year out over at the likes of Goldman?
Across the banks, many of the banks came out and made this pledge that they would not cut through the pandemic. Goldman Sachs, in fact, was one of the banks. Of course, they weren't completely true to that pledge. They did carry out some cuts, especially in late 2020, but by and large, it was nothing like what they typically tend to do. And their workforce in the last few years, I believe since the end of 2018 through the third quarter of 2022, has grown about 34% to more than 49,000 people. So there's clearly been a lot of growth. They've nibbled away at a number of acquisitions. So there has been an inflation in their ranks, perhaps more than the price of your steak last night.
Yep.
So they clearly see that there is room for making some cuts. There is room to become leaner. And that's what they're aiming for, because that's the message they want to send. Remember, next month they come out with earnings, and of course, sounds like with these job cuts announcements around the same time, a month after that, they will undertake another investor day. Goldman Sachs typically has never done that. It's never had investor days for its shareholders. It came out. They came out with their debut investor day in 2019. That was the first time ever that Goldman Sachs did it. And of course, they met a lot of those targets, but it's unclear how much of that was strategy realignment and how much of that was pure luck of COVID and the pandemic and the windfall that it unleashed on Wall Street. But 3 years later, the pressures are very different. Now we're going from a windfall era for the banks to something that will look like a more normalized environment, and where strategy is what will help differentiate one bank from another. And that's what Goldman Sachs is eyeing, and that's where they want to go in and give a proper message to give shareholders some reason for cheer, because this stock doesn't have the same kind of enthusiasm from investors as some of their main peers, and they want to address that and they want to correct that.